You may have noticed something unsettling about certain interactions in your life. A conversation leaves you exhausted. A message changes your mood for hours. A single opinion from someone else quietly reshapes how you see yourself. Nothing dramatic happened. No visible conflict. And yet, your inner state was moved by forces outside you. Perhaps you felt pressured to agree when you wished to remain silent. Perhaps you explained yourself longer than necessary. Perhaps you sensed afterward that your reaction did not truly belong to you. The Stoics observed this long ago. Most suffering does not come from events. It comes from the invisible surrender of our inner authority. And manipulation rarely begins with others. It begins the moment we forget what belongs to us and what never did. Modern life makes this forgetting easy. You wake into a world already speaking to you. Opinions waiting, expectations waiting, comparisons waiting. You scroll through images of certainty while feeling uncertainty within yourself. You measure progress against strangers. You rehearse conversations before they occur. You anticipate judgment before anyone has spoken. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, attention leaves the present moment and attaches itself to imagined reactions. You begin adjusting yourself in advance, not because someone demanded it, but because you feared losing approval. The mind becomes occupied with external control. How am I perceived? Did I say the right thing? Will they misunderstand me? And in this state, manipulation becomes effortless, because anyone who can influence your emotions can influence your decisions. The Stoics saw this clearly. They understood that emotional dependence creates invisible chains. Perhaps you have felt anger rise quickly in certain situations, a criticism that lingers longer than it should, a dismissive tone that stays with you all day, a moment of rejection that quietly changes how you behave afterward. It is not weakness, it is human. But the Stoics asked a different question. Why should another person possess the power to govern your peace? They noticed something profound. People are not controlled by events. They are controlled by their interpretations. Two individuals face the same insult. One burns with resentment. The other remains unmoved. The difference is not circumstance. It is perception. And here lies the Stoic rule that makes a person impossible to manipulate. You retain authority over your judgment. Nothing enters your inner world without your permission. This realization does not arrive easily, because most of us were taught subtly to outsource emotional stability. We seek reassurance from others. We fear exclusion. We adjust behavior to preserve harmony. There is comfort in belonging, but dependence disguises itself as connection. When your emotional state depends on another's reaction, your freedom quietly disappears. You begin negotiating your authenticity. You say yes when you mean no. You remain when you should leave. You explain when silence would protect dignity. Manipulation thrives not through force, but through emotional vulnerability. And often, no one intends to manipulate you. They simply act according to their own desires. It is your unexamined reaction that gives their behavior power. The Stoics trained themselves to examine every impression before accepting it. A harsh word arrives. Instead of reacting, they pause. Is this truly harmful or merely uncomfortable? Is my anger justified or automatic? Is my peace worth surrendering to this moment? This pause is invisible, but it is revolutionary. Between stimulus and response lies freedom. Most people never inhabit this space. They live inside reaction. The Stoic lives inside choice. Consider relationships. You may have once felt compelled to win arguments, to prove your intentions, to make others understand you completely. Yet understanding cannot be forced. Approval cannot be guaranteed, and emotional persuasion often traps both people in endless conflict. The Stoic learns something quieter. You are responsible for your character, not for another person's opinion of it. When you accept this fully, conversations change. You listen without defensiveness. You speak without urgency. You disengage from emotional games without hostility. And suddenly manipulation loses its entry point, because manipulation requires emotional reaction. Without reaction, influence dissolves. At work, the same principle appears. Praise once lifted your confidence excessively. Criticism once diminished it. Your internal state rose and fell according to external evaluation. But the Stoics separated effort from outcome. They focused on action within control. Preparation, integrity, attention, presence. Results belonged partly to fate. When your self-worth no longer depends on approval or success, pressure loses its grip. You become difficult to intimidate. Not rebellious, stable. Social media amplifies manipulation through comparison. It invites constant evaluation of identity. Who is ahead? Who appears fulfilled? Who seems certain? The mind begins constructing a fictional hierarchy, and without noticing, you begin competing against illusions. The Stoics warned against this long before technology existed. Comparison is surrendering judgment to appearances. You stop asking, what is true for me? You start asking, how do I measure against others? Inner sovereignty fades. The Stoic rule restores it. Return judgment to yourself. Observe without attaching identity. See without envying. Participate without dependence. There comes a moment when practicing this rule creates discomfort. You begin noticing how often you once reacted automatically, how frequently mood depended on external validation, how easily silence felt threatening. This recognition can feel unsettling, because emotional independence initially resembles isolation. You may speak less, react less, explain less. Others may interpret this change as distance, but something deeper is occurring. You are reclaiming authorship of your inner life. The Stoics never sought emotional numbness. They sought emotional clarity. You still feel disappointment. You still feel affection. You still feel grief. But feeling no longer compels immediate reaction. Emotion becomes information, not command. You acknowledge anger without obeying it. You notice fear without surrendering direction. You experience praise without becoming dependent on it. This is self-command under pressure. And self-command dissolves manipulation at its root. Imagine a person who cannot be provoked into anger easily, who does not chase approval, who does not panic under uncertainty, who accepts outcomes without resentment. Such a person cannot be controlled through guilt, fear, or flattery. They remain calm not because life is gentle, but because their inner world is governed consciously. This calm presence often feels powerful to others, not aggressive, unshakable. Yet Stoicism asks for something deeper than resistance. It asks for amor fati, love of fate, not passive resignation, but cooperation with reality. When you stop fighting what you cannot control, emotional leverage disappears. No one can threaten you with outcomes you have already accepted. Loss becomes survivable. Change becomes natural. Uncertainty becomes expected. Acceptance removes fear. And without fear, manipulation loses its foundation. You may notice now that the Stoic rule is simple, but demanding. Control your judgments, not events, not people, not outcomes, your judgments. This discipline transforms daily life. An insult becomes a sound, not a wound. Delay becomes time, not injustice. Failure becomes instruction, not identity. Each moment becomes material for practice. Over time, a quiet confidence forms. You trust your responses. You trust your ability to endure discomfort. You trust your capacity to remain steady. This trust cannot be granted by others. It grows from repeated acts of self-governance, and slowly, you become less reactive to the world, not detached from life, but anchored within it. There is a peaceful strength in knowing that your emotional state belongs to you. No conversation can steal it without permission. No criticism can define you without consent. No praise can control you without attachment. You move through life participating fully yet inwardly free. This is inner sovereignty. The Stoics considered it the highest form of freedom available to a human being. Not control over circumstances, control over self. And perhaps now you understand why some people appear impossible to manipulate. They are not stronger physically. They are not immune to emotion. They have simply learned the discipline of perception. They examine impressions before believing them. They choose responses rather than inheriting reactions. They protect inner peace as carefully as others protect possessions. Their freedom is quiet, but profound. So as this conversation draws to stillness, allow yourself a moment of reflection. Notice how often your peace has depended on forces outside you. Notice how many reactions occurred without conscious choice. And consider gently, if no one can control your thoughts unless you surrender them, what would change in your life if you fully reclaimed authority over your own judgment? There is a quiet shift that begins once you understand this rule. At first, nothing external changes. The same people speak, The same pressures exist, the same uncertainties remain, but your relationship with them transforms. You begin to notice how often others attempt to influence you through emotion rather than reason, sometimes through urgency. Answer now. Decide quickly. React immediately. Speed becomes a tool of control. The Stoics resisted urgency, not because they were slow, but because they valued clarity over reaction. You start allowing silence between stimulus and response. You pause before answering. You observe before agreeing. And within that pause, manipulation loses momentum. Because manipulation depends on emotional haste, calm awareness interrupts it. You may remember moments when guilt guided your decisions. You agreed to things that exhausted you. You remained in situations that diminished you. You carried responsibility that was never truly yours, not from weakness, from kindness without boundaries. The Stoics understood that virtue requires discernment. Compassion without self-command becomes self-neglect. You begin learning a difficult form of honesty. You can care deeply for others without surrendering yourself. You can refuse without hostility. You can withdraw without resentment. You can stand firm without aggression. This balance is rare, and those who possess it become extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. There is also manipulation that comes from praise. Not all influence arrives through conflict. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in admiration. Approval can be as powerful as criticism. You may have noticed how praise subtly encourages repetition. You begin acting to maintain approval rather than to preserve integrity. The Stoics warned against becoming dependent on applause, because applause changes with circumstance. Character must not. When praise no longer determines your direction, freedom expands quietly. You act according to principle rather than reward. And suddenly, external validation loses authority over your behavior. Another form of manipulation hides within fear of loss, fear of losing connection, fear of losing status, fear of losing opportunity. Fear whispers that peace depends on holding tightly. But emotional pain often teaches the opposite. Everything external is temporary. Relationships evolve. Positions change. Certainty dissolves. The Stoic accepts impermanence not with sadness, but with realism. When you accept that loss is part of life, threats lose power. No one can control you through what you are already prepared to release. This is amor fati again, loving fate enough to stop bargaining with it. You begin to feel lighter, not because life becomes easier, but because resistance fades. You stop fighting every discomfort. You stop interpreting every challenge as personal injustice. You stop needing reality to behave differently before allowing yourself peace. This is the discipline of perception. Events remain neutral. Meaning arises from judgment, and judgment belongs to you, always. There may come a moment when others notice your change. They may ask why you seem calmer, why arguments no longer provoke you, why you do not defend yourself as urgently as before. Some may misunderstand. They may interpret calmness as indifference. But you know the truth. You are not disengaged. You are deliberate. You choose which battles deserve energy. You choose which opinions deserve attention. You choose which emotions deserve action. Choice replaces impulse, and choice restores dignity. The Stoics believe dignity comes from alignment between thought and action. When you act against your own judgment to satisfy pressure, internal conflict arises. You feel unsettled without knowing why. But when action aligns with inner conviction, peace follows, even when outcomes remain uncertain. You learn to trust quiet intuition, shaped by reflection rather than reaction. You begin living from principle rather than persuasion. And slowly your presence changes. You become less reactive to emotional turbulence around you. Others may still rush, panic, argue, persuade. You remain steady, like a still point within movement. This steadiness reveals something surprising. Manipulation often disappears, not because you resist it aggressively, but because you no longer provide emotional leverage. People cannot provoke urgency where patience exists. They cannot provoke insecurity where self-knowledge exists. They cannot provoke dependence where inner sovereignty exists. You become psychologically independent, and independence reshapes every interaction. Loneliness sometimes accompanies this stage. You may notice fewer dramatic conversations, less emotional intensity, less chaos. At first, quietness may feel unfamiliar, but the Stoics cherish solitude because it strengthened independence from external noise. You learn to enjoy your own company. Your thoughts become companions rather than adversaries. And when solitude becomes peaceful, fear of abandonment fades. No one can manipulate someone who is not afraid of being alone. There is another transformation unfolding beneath the surface. You stop seeking control over people. You stop trying to change others' behavior. You stop persuading reality to match expectation. Instead, energy returns inward. You refine your reactions. You cultivate patience. You practice endurance. Self-command replaces external control, and paradoxically, relationships often improve, because calm presence invites trust more than force ever could. The Stoics described freedom as mastery over desire and aversion, not eliminating desire, but refusing to be ruled by it. You desire connection, yet remain whole without it. You pursue success, yet remain stable without guarantee. You welcome pleasure, yet remain resilient when comfort disappears. Balance emerges, and balance cannot be exploited. You may now begin sensing the deeper meaning behind the Stoic rule. It is not about protecting yourself from others. It is about protecting your mind from unconscious surrender. Every day offers countless impressions, seeking entrance into your inner world. Some deserve attention, many do not. Your task is not to control the world's behavior. Your task is to decide which impressions deserve belief. This discipline creates psychological clarity, and clarity creates freedom. Imagine moving through life knowing that nothing external can compel your inner state without consent. Conflict becomes manageable. Uncertainty becomes tolerable. Pressure becomes training. You respond thoughtfully rather than defensively. You remain kind without becoming vulnerable to manipulation. You remain strong without becoming rigid. Calm strength replaces emotional armor, and gradually you realize something profound. The Stoic rule was never about becoming resistant to others. It was about becoming loyal to yourself, loyal to reason, loyal to character, loyal to inner peace. You no longer abandon your judgment to preserve comfort. You stand quietly aligned with who you are becoming. So now, as this reflection continues unfolding within you, notice your own reactions today. Notice moments where emotion attempted to take command. Notice moments where silence might have protected peace. Notice moments where approval influenced decision. Awareness itself is the beginning of freedom. The Stoics believed transformation does not arrive through sudden change. It arrives through repeated moments of conscious choice, moment by moment, thought by thought, response by response. And perhaps the real power of this Stoic rule is not that it makes you resistant to manipulation, but that it returns you to authorship of your own life. You stop being shaped unconsciously by circumstances. You begin shaping yourself deliberately. And in doing so, you discover a rare form of strength, a mind that cannot be easily persuaded away from peace. Take a quiet breath now. Consider gently. If your reactions create your experience of the world, what would happen if you chose every response as if your inner freedom depended on it? There comes a stage in this journey where something subtle begins to settle inside you. You no longer feel the need to win every interaction. You no longer feel compelled to correct every misunderstanding. You no longer experience urgency when others attempt to pull you into emotional turbulence. Instead, a quiet awareness remains. You see reactions forming before they take control. You notice emotional pressure without immediately responding to it. You recognize when a situation is attempting to claim authority over your peace. And for the first time, perhaps, you realize that freedom was never about controlling people. It was about governing yourself. Most manipulation succeeds because it touches something unresolved within us. The desire to be liked, the fear of exclusion, the need to be right, the discomfort of uncertainty. These are deeply human experiences. The Stoics never condemned them. They observed them. They studied their own impulses with honesty, rather than judgment. You begin doing the same. When irritation arises, you ask quietly, what expectation was just challenged? When anxiety appears, you ask, what outcome am I trying to control? When approval feels necessary, you ask, whose judgment am I allowing to define me? Each question returns authority inward. And every time authority returns inward, manipulation loses strength. You may notice that calmness begins to replace defensiveness. You listen more fully, not to agree, not to argue. but to understand without surrendering yourself. You realize that disagreement does not threaten identity. Criticism does not erase character. Misunderstanding does not diminish truth. This realization removes the invisible tension that once governed conversations. You stop performing, you start being, and authenticity cannot be easily controlled. The Stoics believed that the greatest prison is unconscious reaction. A person ruled by impulse lives predictably. Praise controls them, fear redirects them, anger provokes them, but a person governed by reason becomes internally free. They respond thoughtfully, rather than automatically. They remain calm when others expect escalation. They remain grounded when others expect insecurity. This unpredictability is not rebellion. It is independence. You are no longer reacting according to external design. You are living according to inner principle. There is a profound peace in no longer needing emotional victory. You allow others their opinions without absorbing them. You allow circumstances to unfold without constant resistance. You allow uncertainty to exist without demanding resolution. Acceptance becomes strength, not resignation. Alignment. You cooperate with reality instead of arguing with it. And cooperation removes the emotional friction manipulation depends upon. You begin to understand why the Stoics emphasized endurance over comfort. Comfort seeks reassurance. Endurance builds stability. When discomfort no longer frightens you, pressure loses influence. No one can rush a person who is comfortable waiting. No one can intimidate a person prepared for difficulty. No one can control a person who has already accepted uncertainty. You become emotionally self-sufficient, and self-sufficiency is quiet power. At this stage, your presence changes in ways difficult to describe. You speak less, yet your words carry weight. You react less, yet others feel your stability. You do not attempt to dominate situations. You simply remain steady within them. People often sense this before understanding it. They feel calmer around you, not because you impose control, but because you embody composure. Calmness becomes influence without effort. You also begin to forgive more easily, not because others were right, but because resentment binds you to the past. The Stoics viewed forgiveness as liberation of attention. You release what no longer deserves mental energy. You stop rehearsing old conversations. You stop reliving emotional injuries. You reclaim the present moment, and the present moment cannot be manipulated by memories. Perhaps the deepest realization emerges here. You do not need to defend your inner peace. You only need to refuse to abandon it. Life continues offering challenges, unexpected words, uncertain outcomes, changing relationships. But now you meet them differently. You pause. You examine. You choose. Again and again. Self-command becomes habit, and habit becomes character. This is why the Stoic rule makes you impossible to manipulate, because manipulation requires access to uncontrolled emotion, and you have learned to observe emotion before granting it authority. You still feel deeply. You still care. You still engage fully with life, but your center remains untouched. Your peace no longer depends on agreement, praise, certainty, or control. It rests within conscious judgment, within disciplined perception, within acceptance of fate itself. Amor fati, you welcome life as it arrives, and nothing can threaten someone who no longer fears what life may bring. So now, as this conversation comes gently to its end, sit quietly for a moment. Notice your breath. Notice the stillness available beneath thought. Recognize how much of your life has already prepared you for this understanding. Every difficulty trained awareness. Every disappointment revealed attachment. Every challenge invited self-command. You were never becoming hardened. You were becoming free. Free from reaction, free from dependence, free to act according to reason rather than pressure. The Stoics believe true power is invisible. It does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition. It exists quietly within the person who governs their own mind. And perhaps that person is slowly emerging within you now. So I leave you with one final reflection. If no one can manipulate a mind that understands itself, what part of your inner world are you ready to take full responsibility for today? Remain steady. Before we part, there is something the Stoics would gently remind you. Understanding is not transformation. Practice is. Insight opens the door, but daily awareness is what allows you to walk through it. You will leave this moment and return to ordinary life. Conversations will continue. Pressures will return, unexpected emotions will appear again, and there will be moments when you react automatically, moments when irritation rises too quickly, moments when approval still feels important, moments when uncertainty unsettles you. This does not mean you have failed. It means you are human. The Stoics never expected perfection. They practiced return again and again. Return to awareness. Return to reason. Return to self-command. You may begin noticing small opportunities throughout your day. Someone speaks sharply, you feel the first spark of defensiveness. And then you remember, you pause. That pause is victory, not because you suppressed emotion, but because you witnessed it. You chose awareness over impulse. Each time this happens, inner sovereignty strengthens quietly. No announcement, no dramatic change, only gradual freedom. Manipulation loses power not in grand moments, but in ordinary ones. A delayed response instead of immediate reaction. A calm breath instead of escalation. A refusal to internalize what was never yours. These moments accumulate. They reshape identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone constantly affected by the world. You begin seeing yourself as someone who meets the world consciously. And identity determines behavior more than intention ever could. There is beauty in this simplicity. You do not need to withdraw from life to practice Stoicism. You practice while living fully, while loving people, while working, while facing uncertainty, while navigating success and failure alike. Every circumstance becomes training. Every interaction becomes reflection. Every challenge becomes opportunity for mastery. The Stoic life is not distant from reality. It is deeply embedded within it. You may notice another change emerging slowly. You become kinder, not weaker, kinder, because when you no longer feel threatened by others' behavior, compassion becomes natural. You recognize that many reactions you once took personally were expressions of another person's struggle. Their anger was pain. Their criticism was insecurity. Their pressure was fear. Understanding replaces resentment, and compassion grounded in self-command cannot be exploited. It is firm, clear, and calm. The Stoics believe that peace does not come from controlling life. Peace comes from aligning expectation with reality. You stop demanding permanence from temporary things. You stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world. You stop demanding emotional comfort from every moment. And when expectation softens, gratitude appears. You begin appreciating simple existence itself, a quiet morning, a thoughtful conversation, a moment of stillness between responsibilities. Life feels less like a battle and more like participation. Perhaps the most profound freedom arrives when you realize this. No one else can live your inner life for you. No praise can complete it. No criticism can destroy it. No circumstance can define it. Your inner world remains yours alone to cultivate. This realization removes comparison, removes urgency, removes the need to constantly prove worth. You begin living not to impress, but to align. And alignment produces a calm confidence that requires no explanation. If you observe carefully, you may see how rare this state has become in modern life. Many rush, many react, many search endlessly for control outside themselves. But the Stoic walks differently, steady, attentive, unhurried. Not detached from life, but deeply rooted within it. The world may remain noisy. You learn to remain quiet inside it. And so the Stoic rule reveals its final meaning. You do not become impossible to manipulate because you resist others. You become impossible to manipulate because you understand yourself. You know your values. You recognize your emotions. You accept fate without surrendering character. You respond instead of reacting. You remain calm without becoming distant. You remain strong without becoming rigid. You remain open without becoming vulnerable to control. This is quiet mastery. As this reflection gently closes, allow yourself one final moment of stillness. Notice the calm that exists when nothing needs to be proven. Notice the strength that exists when nothing needs to be defended. Notice the freedom that exists when your peace no longer depends on external approval. This is the beginning of inner sovereignty, not an ending, a practice. A path walked daily, patiently, consciously. And perhaps the question worth carrying with you beyond this moment is this. If your mind is the one place no one can enter without permission, How will you choose to guard it from now on? Remain steady.